The first thing Chris Hemsworth noticed about Harbor Light Diner wasn't the smell of bacon grease or the sound of the morning rush. It was the way the waitress moved. Not slow, not careless, but careful. The way someone moves when they're trying not to be noticed, when invisibility has become a survival skill rather than a choice. She refilled a trucker's coffee without being asked, smiled at a child who knocked a fork off the table, tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear and kept moving, eyes forward, efficient, quiet. Chris had seen that walk before. Not on a film set, not in a studio. In his mother's kitchen, back in Melbourne, 30-something years ago, when she came home from a double shift at the pub and made dinner anyway because she didn't know how not to. He pulled his cap lower and ordered the breakfast special. It was a Thursday morning in Savannah, Georgia, early October. The kind of morning where the air off the harbor smells like salt and diesel and something almost sweet underneath, like the city is trying to remind you it was beautiful once, before the traffic came. Harbor Light Diner sat on the corner of River Street and Factor's Walk, wedged between a souvenir shop that wouldn't open for another 2 hours and a shipping company that never closed. The sign out front was old enough to be charming. The booths were red vinyl, cracked at the seams but clean. The coffee came in heavy white mugs that felt like they'd survived a war. Chris had been in Savannah for 2 days, visiting an old friend from the extraction chute who'd moved down here after his divorce and swore the low country would fix whatever was broken in a man. Chris wasn't broken, but he wasn't arguing with Savannah either. He'd woken at 5, run the waterfront in the dark, and left his suite at the mansion on Forsyth Park, a corner room on the 4th floor with long windows that looked out over the park's live oaks, because 4-star quiet at 6 in the morning felt like the wrong kind of silence. He wanted noise. He wanted coffee that came in a mug, not a pour-over ceremony. He walked until Harbor Light appeared, and the light inside looked warm, and he was hungry. He was wearing a faded gray flannel, jeans with a tear above the left knee, and a worn Akubra hat he'd had since 2009. The heavy Swiss timepiece he usually wore on shoots was back in his room. He'd learned years ago that a watch like that changed the way people looked at you before you'd said a word. No security, no assistant, just a 6'3" Australian with a beard that was getting out of hand and a genuine interest in the eggs and grits. The hostess, a teenager with a nose ring and bored eyes, didn't look twice at him. He chose a corner booth near the window where he could watch the whole floor. Old habit, not paranoia. Just the thing his brain did in rooms, mapped exits, read postures, cataloged who was comfortable and who wasn't. Within 90 seconds, he had the whole picture. Her name tag said Amanda Cole, he'd find out later. 29 years old, 4 years at Harbor Light. Single mother to a 6-year-old girl named Iris, who had asthma and a gap-toothed smile and a stuffed rabbit named Captain that went everywhere with her. Amanda moved through the breakfast rush with the precision of someone who'd learned that efficiency was a form of self-protection. She carried 3 plates on one arm, remembered modifications without writing them down, and had the particular skill. The one that only comes from years of surviving demanding customers, of appearing to be in 2 places at once. Chris watched her work the way he used to watch sparring partners, not looking for weakness, looking for the thing underneath the surface that tells you who a person really is. What he saw in Amanda Cole was a woman running on fumes who hadn't stopped running because stopping wasn't an option she could afford. He ordered from her directly. She didn't recognize him. He could tell. Her eyes were genuinely focused on her notepad, not performing the subtle social calculation that happened when someone was trying to figure out if they knew his face. Eggs over easy, grits, wheat toast, black coffee. Yes, sir. Be about 8 minutes. The cook's still warming up. He nodded. Take your time. She was gone before he finished the sentence. Derek Sloan arrived at 7:15. He came through the side door that connected to the manager's office, already wearing his authority like an ill-fitting suit. 44 years old, thick through the shoulders, dark hair combed back with something that held too well. He wore a watch that wanted to be an Oyster Perpetual, but wasn't quite. Close enough to fool someone who'd never touched the real thing. His shirt was pressed. His smile, when he deployed it toward the regular customers near the front, had the quality of something practiced in a mirror. Chris noticed him the way he'd noticed certain people on certain sets, the ones who made the room tighter just by walking into it. Amanda noticed him too. Her shoulders moved, just slightly, the way shoulders move when a person is bracing. The man behind the kitchen pass noticed something different. His name was Tommy Briggs, 40 years old, broad through the back, with the kind of hands that had been doing physical work long enough that the knuckles no longer fully straightened. He'd been cooking short order for 19 years across 6 states, and he'd been at Harbor Light for 3, longer than Derek, longer than most of the floor staff. He had a daughter in middle school and a second job doing weekend catering gigs across the river in South Carolina, and he was the kind of person who noticed things and said very little about what he noticed. He noticed the new customer in the corner booth, not because of the man's height, though that was hard to miss in a booth designed for people 5 inches shorter, because of the stillness. Most people who came in alone for breakfast had a particular energy, phone out, eyes down, the low-grade restlessness of someone passing time. This man had set his phone face down on the table and was watching the floor the way someone watches a thing they are genuinely trying to understand. Tommy had seen that quality of attention before, but rarely in a diner at 7 in the morning. He filed it away and went back to his eggs. Derek surveyed the floor with territorial satisfaction. His eyes moved across the tables, checking occupancy, checking pace. Then they landed on Amanda's section, where 5 of her 8 tables were occupied and moving well. He didn't compliment her on it. He walked to the register. The first theft happened at 7:23. A construction foreman in a yellow vest finished his breakfast at table 4, Amanda's table, and left a $10 bill under his coffee mug. Standard tip for a $12 meal. Nothing extraordinary, but honest. Amanda cleared his plate and reached for the 10. Derek was there before her hand closed. New policy. He said it without looking at her. Tips over $5 get logged at the register for tax documentation. Corporate requirement. He picked up the bill with 2 fingers like he was handling paperwork. Amanda blinked. Since when? Since this week. He moved away before she could follow up. The 10 disappeared into his apron pocket. Not a register. Not a log. His pocket. Chris set down his coffee mug slowly, quietly. He had spent years around people who were very good at making things disappear. Prop masters, continuity coordinators, sleight-of-hand consultants on a heist film he'd done in 2019. He knew what misdirection looked like. What he just watched wasn't corporate policy. It was theft. Clean, practiced, and fast. He picked up his phone and set it on the table. Screen facing out. A small adjustment. Nothing dramatic. He started recording. Over the next 40 minutes, Derek Sloan stole from Amanda Cole 4 separate times. $8 from a nurse who'd left it folded under a creamer cup with a handwritten note. Good service. Thank you. $12 from a retired couple celebrating their anniversary with French toast at a diner because they liked simple things. $15 from a young woman in scrubs who'd been on the overnight shift and just wanted eggs and human kindness before she went home to sleep. $6 from an elderly man who sat for an hour with his younger brother and ordered nothing but oatmeal and 2 hot chocolates and left every dollar he had in his wallet because Amanda had drawn a little whale on a napkin without being asked. Each time, the method was the same. Derek appeared as Amanda moved away from the table. He collected the tip with manufactured authority. He invented a policy. He pocketed the money. $41 in 40 minutes. Chris kept the camera steady and ate his eggs. He'd had years of practice keeping his face still when things were going wrong on set, when a scene wasn't working, when a director was losing the room, when a co-star was struggling and needed a calm presence across from them to anchor to. He used that stillness now. Watched, recorded, ate his grits, which were genuinely good. The moment that changed things wasn't the theft. It was what happened after. A family came in at 7:55. Father, mother, 2 kids in tow. The father was in work boots with dried concrete on the laces. The mother had that particular brand of tired that said she'd been up since 5 and hadn't had coffee yet. The family was loud the way families are at breakfast when they're somewhere that isn't home. Amanda got them settled with the efficiency of someone who understood exactly what this situation required. She brought extra napkins before anyone asked. She made room for the bags and the coats and the particular chaos of a family that didn't get out for breakfast often. She didn't rush them. She didn't perform patience. She had it. When the family finished 40 minutes later, The father counted out his bills with the careful concentration of a man who knew exactly what was in his wallet. He left $22 on a $34 check. It was more than he could probably afford. He gathered his family. On the way out, he paused and told Amanda she was wonderful. She said, "Come back and see us," and she meant it. She turned toward the tip. Derek was already there. Large tips need documentation. He was louder this time, comfortable, confident in a way that made Chris's jaw tighten. Amanda stopped. Her voice was careful. "Derek, that family, they don't have a lot. That was, are you questioning procedure?" The question landed in the room like something heavy dropped on a floor. Nearby customers heard it. A woman at table 9 looked up from her phone. "No." Amanda's voice was very quiet. "I'm not questioning anything." "Good." Derek pocketed the $22 and walked away. Amanda stood at the cleared table for 3 seconds. Just 3. Then she straightened the salt and pepper shakers, wiped down the surface, and went back to work. Chris watched her smooth her apron flat with both hands before moving to the next table. He thought about the way his mother used to save small things, rubber bands, extra napkins, half-used notepads. Not because she needed them, because the habit of not wasting anything was too deep to shake. He thought about what $22 meant to a woman who was counting every dollar she earned. He flagged Amanda over for more coffee. She came immediately, pot in hand, the professional smile already in place. "How are your eggs? Cooked right?" "Perfect." He kept his voice easy, unhurried. "I've been watching the floor this morning." A small wariness moved through her eyes. The wariness of someone who'd learned that observation could mean trouble. "Oh, you're good at this job," he said it plainly, not as flattery, as fact. She paused, the wariness softened, slightly, complicated by something not quite surprise, but close to it. People didn't usually say that. Not managers, not customers, not the people who were supposed to notice. "Thank you." She refilled his mug. "It's the right kind of work, I think, if you let yourself actually do it." He nodded, asked her nothing else, let her go. But when she turned away, he'd seen it. The faint red at the corners of her eyes that she was working very hard to keep invisible. He opened his contacts and found the number he needed. Gerald Marsh, owner, Harbor Light Diner Group. 8 locations across coastal Georgia. A man Chris had met twice. Once at a charity golf event in Hilton Head and once at a film premiere where Gerald had been someone's +1 and had spent 20 minutes talking to Chris about the time he'd eaten at the same diner in Byron Bay that Chris's family occasionally stopped at. Gerald Marsh had given Chris his card both times and said, "Call me if you ever need anything in Savannah," and meant it the way people mean things. When they're trying to make a connection with someone they think is important. Chris had kept the card because he kept every card. He texted instead of calling. "Need to talk. It's about one of your locations. Harbor Light on River Street. It's urgent and it's serious and it should happen today." He sent the text and went back to his coffee. Gerald Marsh texted back in 4 minutes. "On my way, 90 minutes. Chris settled in and kept watching. What he saw over the next hour and a half was the architecture of a system. It wasn't random. Derek Sloan wasn't stealing out of impulse or desperation. He was running an operation. He targeted Amanda specifically. Chris noticed it around the 8th incident, the pattern becoming undeniable. Other servers kept their tips. The woman working the counter, the older gentleman on the far section near the windows, they were untouched. Only Amanda's tables were subject to the invented policy. Only Amanda received the corrections, the public rebukes, the quiet erosions of authority designed to ensure she never felt stable enough to push back. Why Amanda specifically? Chris thought about it while he nursed his 3rd coffee. Single mother, no backup income, no margin for risk. Derek had identified exactly how much leverage he needed and applied it with precision. The most vulnerable person on the floor was the most profitable target. That wasn't impulsive. That was calculated. He'd seen this logic before, not in restaurants. In a pub in Melbourne's Inner West the summer he was 17. His mother had been working double shifts at a place called The Anchor. Lunch and dinner, 6 days a week, to cover the rent after his father left. And the family bank account went from thin to empty in the space of 3 weeks. The Anchor's floor manager was a man named Pete who wore a gold chain and called everyone mate in a way that meant the opposite. Pete had a system. He collected the Friday night tips personally, cash only, high traffic night, and redistributed them according to his own criteria, which turned out to mean he kept a third and split the rest among the staff he liked. Chris's mother was not staff he liked. She was efficient and unsmiling and didn't laugh at his jokes, and so her tips went somewhere else while she worked the hardest section on the busiest night. Chris had found out because she'd shown him her payslip once, in a moment of exhausted honesty, and he'd done the math. He'd been furious. She'd told him to let it go. "You can't fight Pete," she'd said. "Pete knows the owner. Pete's been here since the beginning. What happened to Pete?" Chris had asked, years later, when the anchor was long behind them both. She thought about it. He's still there, probably. People like Pete tend to stay. He'd never forgotten that. The particular helplessness of it. The way a system could be rotten in a way that was perfectly visible to everyone inside it, and completely invisible to anyone who might actually change it. He was 41 years old now. He had resources his mother never had. He was sitting in a booth in Savannah, Georgia, watching the same system run the same play on a different woman, and the only thing that had changed was that this time, someone with the ability to do something about it happened to be in the room. Around 8:40, Derek found a new gear. He called Amanda to the register in front of a table of 6 tourists who were ordering off the menu with the kind of demanding specificity that required concentration. "Your last 3 tables," Derek said loudly, "didn't get timely refills." Amanda turned from the tourists. "Table 11 and 13 both got refills in." "I'm not asking for your timeline. I'm documenting a pattern of service issues." His voice carried. He intended it to carry. "We may need to discuss whether your current schedule is a good fit for your performance level." The threat wrapped in HR language. The dagger disguised as a memo. Amanda's face went smooth and professional. The expression of someone who has learned to survive by not reacting. "I understand." She turned back to her tourists. Derek watched her go with a satisfaction that was almost private. Almost. Chris had been watching people perform for 30 years. He knew the difference between someone doing a job and someone enjoying power. Derek Sloan enjoyed this. Gerald Marsh walked through the front door of Harbor Light Diner at 9:17. He was 61, compact, with close-cropped silver hair and the sunburned forearms of a man who'd worked outdoors for years before he'd had offices. He wore khakis and a blue button-down with the Harbor Light logo on the breast pocket. He looked like what he was, a man who'd built something from the ground up and took quiet pride in it. He spotted Chris immediately. His face did the thing faces do when the brain needs a moment to confirm that what the eyes are seeing is actually happening. Chris stood from the booth, kept his voice low. "Thank Gerald for coming." Gerald slid into the seat across from him. His eyes moved to the floor, already reading the room. Chris could see him cataloging the staff, the pace, the energy. The particular sixth sense of a business owner who'd spent decades learning what healthy and unhealthy looked like in his own places. Then his eyes found Derek Sloan behind the register. Something shifted in his expression. Not recognition of wrongdoing yet, but recognition of the man. The particular alertness that came from already having a file. "Tell me," Gerald said quietly. Chris turned his phone around and pressed play. They watched 47 minutes of footage together. Gerald didn't speak. He watched the way a man watches something that's making him sick, can't be looked away from. His jaw set. His hands, folded on the table, went still. When Derek's voice came through the recording, clear, casual, contemptuous, explaining to no one in particular that Amanda's tips were really just profit margin waiting to be reallocated. Gerald closed his eyes for 3 seconds. When he opened them, they were different. The hospitality was gone. What was left was something older and harder. "There's more," Chris said. He mentioned calling another manager, different location, asking about methods. Gerald looked at the floor, found Derek in his peripheral vision, currently leaning against the counter, talking to a regular with all the ease of a man who felt completely safe. He pulled out his own phone and made a call. His voice was very quiet. "Get me HR. Get me legal. Ants, get me Marcus Webb's personnel file. No today, right now." He ended the call and looked at Chris with an expression that was complicated. Gratitude and mortification in equal measure. "How long has this been going on?" "I've been here 2 days. The comfort level, the systems he's built, this isn't new." Gerald nodded. "No, it isn't." "You knew?" "I had concerns. Nothing I could document." He placed the tip policy into an internal memo 3 months ago. Said it came from corporate. It didn't. I didn't catch it. He paused. "That's on me." Chris said nothing. Let the silence do what silence does. Gerald was quiet for a long moment. Then, Derek's been with us 3 years. Good numbers, no formal complaints. He paused. I need to verify this independently before I act. Chris said nothing. Gerald looked at the footage one more time. Then he looked at the floor, at Derek behind the register, relaxed, talking to a regular, completely unaware that the ground had already shifted beneath him. He's going to say it was a misunderstanding, Gerald said. Policy confusion. That's what they always say. Chris nodded. He's been saying it for months, to Amanda, every single shift. Gerald closed his eyes briefly. Open, reached for his phone. That was when Derek Sloan walked out of the back hallway. He was carrying a clipboard, the studied prop of a manager who needed to look busy. He moved across the floor toward the register, and then something made him glance toward booth 4. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the quality of the silence. Whatever it was, his eyes landed on Gerald's table. On Gerald. On the phone between them, screen still glowing. Something changed in Derek's posture. Subtle. The kind of shift that only lasts half a second before professional composure reassembles itself. But Chris caught it. He'd spent 30 years catching that half second. Derek knew. Gerald saw it too. He stood up. What happened next was quiet. Deliberately quiet. Gerald didn't make a scene. He walked to the register with the unhurried purpose of a man who owned the floor he was walking on. Derek saw him coming and straightened up, smile assembling itself. Gerald, good morning. Didn't know you were coming by, Derek. Gerald's voice was level. Office. Now please. Of course. Derek's confidence was remarkable, Chris thought. The armor of someone who'd never been genuinely caught. They disappeared through the manager's door. For 17 minutes, the diner continued its morning rhythm. Customers ate. Amanda moved between tables, unaware. Tommy Briggs in the kitchen called out order numbers without missing a beat, though Chris noticed he'd positioned himself closer to the past than usual. Close enough to see the dining room clearly through the service window. He wasn't performing calm. He was watching. Chris stayed in his booth, watched Amanda clear a 4 top, watched her smile at an elderly man who was eating alone and reading a paperback thriller with a cracked spine. Watched her refill his coffee and pause for a moment, genuinely, not performatively, to ask what he was reading. She was good at this job the way some people are good at the thing they were built for. She just hadn't been allowed to know it. The manager's door opened at 9:42. Derek Sloan came out first. His face had undergone a change that Chris recognized. The particular rearrangement of features that happens when a person realizes that the ground they were standing on was not actually ground. He was followed by Gerald, and behind Gerald, a woman Chris hadn't seen before. Middle-aged, sharp-eyed, wearing a Harbor Light polo. She'd come through the back, called in by Gerald during those 17 minutes. HR director, Chris guessed, or close to it. Derek's eyes swept the floor. Found Amanda. Something moved through his expression. Not regret, not quite. More like calculation, trying to find an angle, finding none. Gerald spoke to the floor generally, his voice clear and deliberate without being theatrical. I need everyone's attention for a moment. The diner quieted. Customers looked up. Amanda stopped mid-step with a coffee pot in her hand. The elderly man at table 4, the one reading the paperback thriller, set his fork down without looking at it. The woman at table 9, the one who'd looked up when Derek said, "Are you questioning procedure?" looked up again. This time, she didn't look back down. Tommy Briggs stepped out of the kitchen and stood at the pass, arms at his sides, watching. This morning I've become aware of serious conduct violations at this location. Gerald kept his voice measured. As of this moment, Derek Sloan's employment with Harbor Light Diner Group is terminated, effective immediately, pending a full investigation into wage theft and falsification of company policy. The word theft landed in the room like a stone dropped in still water. Derek's jaw tightened. Gerald, you'll receive documentation from HR by end of day. Gerald didn't look at him. You can collect personal items from the office after we've completed inventory. This is Derek. The HR woman's voice had a quality that ended conversations. Derek Sloan looked around the room. His eyes moved from Gerald to the HR director, to the customers watching with open curiosity, to Chris Hemsworth sitting in the corner booth, cap pulled low, watching him with an expression that was entirely neutral. Something flickered in Derek's face, not remorse, but something adjacent to it, The moment when a person understands, for the first time, that they were not as invisible as they believed. He straightened his jacket, walked to the office without another word. Gerald turned to Amanda, who was still standing with the coffee pot, perfectly still. Amanda Cole? Yes. Her voice was careful, controlled. How long have you worked at Harbor Light? 4 years in January. Gerald nodded. Will you sit down with me for a moment? He gestured to the nearest empty booth. She looked at the coffee pot in her hand, at her tables, at the professional habit of not stopping when there was still work to do. Your section can wait, Gerald said. 5 minutes. She sat. Chris watched from across the room. He didn't need to hear what was being said. He could read the shape of it in her body language. The initial wariness, the slow and almost reluctant softening as Gerald spoke. The moment when she understood what was actually being said, her hands came together on the table, fingers interlacing, and she looked down at them for a long moment the way people look down when they're trying to hold themselves together. She nodded once. Gerald said something else. She shook her head, then nodded again. Gerald slid something across the table. Chris couldn't see what it was from this distance. Amanda stared at it. Her shoulders rose and fell with a single slow breath. Then she looked up. Across the diner, and her eyes found Chris in his corner booth. He hadn't moved, hadn't tried to disappear. She looked at him for a long moment with the particular expression of someone recalibrating, understanding that the quiet man with the worn hat and the genuine interest in her work had been something more than a customer. He raised his coffee mug slightly, just that. She held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then she turned back to Gerald. From the kitchen pass, Tommy Briggs watched the whole exchange through the service window. He'd been watching since Gerald walked in, since the moment he'd understood, with the particular clarity of someone who has been waiting a long time for something to change, exactly who the quiet man in the corner booth actually was. Not the name, not the face under the hat, just the type. The kind of person who sees something wrong and decides it is their business. He turned back to his grill, put on a fresh order, said nothing to anyone. Some things didn't need commentary. They just needed to be witnessed. Gerald came to Chris's booth 20 minutes later. The diner had settled back into its rhythm. Amanda was on the floor again, but something had changed. The held quality in her spine had released, just barely, like a knot loosening one thread at a time. What he'd slid across the table to her, Gerald told Chris, was an authorization for immediate back payment of stolen wages based on payroll records cross-referenced with the cash register logs from Derek's shifts. The number, he said, was still being calculated, but it would not be small. He was also effective today, eliminating the assistant manager position that Derek had held and restructuring the role. After reviewing the recordings on Chris's phone, Gerald had sent everything to his legal team. Between the wage theft documentation, the falsified policy memo, and the audio of Derek consulting another location's manager about methods, they were looking at criminal charges, restitution orders, a civil suit on behalf of affected employees. The Harbor Light on River Street would be retrained top to bottom. New management, new systems. A direct line to Gerald's office for any employee who had a concern they couldn't resolve internally. He paused. You could have just called me from your hotel, Gerald said. You had my number. Why did you stay? Chris considered the question. I wanted to make sure I understood what I was seeing. He was quiet for a moment, and I didn't want her to be alone with it longer than she had to be. Gerald was quiet. Then, I appreciate what you did, more than I can say. I didn't do much. I sat here and I watched and I recorded and I called you. Amanda did 4 years of hard work and didn't break under something that would have broken a lot of people. Gerald nodded slowly. That's true. Make sure she knows it's true. Not just today. Ongoing. I will. Chris left at 10:15. He paid his check, left $40 on the table, not a gesture, just a reasonable tip for 3 hours of coffee and a breakfast he genuinely enjoyed. On his way out, he stopped at the kitchen pass. Tommy Briggs was working a fresh ticket, back to the door, moving with the efficient economy of someone who'd done this 10,000 times. Chris said, You saw it the whole time. Tommy didn't turn around immediately. He flipped a set of eggs, slid them onto a plate, called the order number to the floor. Then he turned. Yeah, he said. I saw it. Why didn't you say anything? Tommy looked at him steadily. Same reason anyone doesn't. He paused. No one was going to believe me over him. And I've got a daughter in middle school and a weekend catering job that barely covers the gap. I couldn't afford to be wrong. Chris held his gaze. Gerald's going to want to talk to you. Tommy nodded slowly. I figured. Tell him what you told me, all of it. You won't regret it. He walked out through the front door. He was 3 steps into the morning air when he heard his name. Not his full name, not in the public way that his name usually got said in public, just Chris. He turned. Amanda was standing at the end of the counter, coffee pot still in hand because she was always working, even when she was doing something else. She walked over, stopped about 3 feet from him, which was the right distance for a private conversation in a public room. I don't really know how to say this, she said. And I know you probably hear thank you from people a lot, and it probably sounds like noise after a while. He waited. My daughter's name is Iris. She said it simply. She has a stuffed rabbit named Captain, and she thinks her mom works really hard and is really brave. He listened. I don't always feel brave. Amanda's voice was level, but I kept showing up because she was watching me, and I needed her to see that you don't just lie down when things are hard. Yes. She looked at him directly, the way people look at you when they need you to understand something specific. So when I thank you, I'm thanking you for her too, because she's going to have a better month now, and that matters more than I can explain. Chris thought about his mother, about the particular exhaustion of someone who carries other people's futures in their body and never sets them down. He said, you were the brave one. You kept showing up to a situation that was designed to make you stop showing up. That's the hard part. I just watched. She shook her head slightly. She didn't agree, but she accepted it. She offered her hand. He shook it. She went back to work. He walked out into the Savannah morning, which had warmed while he'd been inside. The harbor was properly awake now, a container ship moving slow in the channel, a pair of college kids jogging the waterfront path, a pelican sitting on a piling with the self-satisfied authority of a creature that had been here longer than any of them. Chris stood for a moment outside Harbor Light Diner and thought about something his mother used to say. You watch how people treat folks who can't fight back. That tells you everything about their character. She'd meant it as a warning, a way to read the room. But it worked the other way too. You also watch how people keep going when the system is designed to stop them. When every dollar they earn gets taken before they can use it, and every time they think about speaking up, someone reminds them what they have to lose. You watch someone like Amanda Cole carry a 6-year-old's future through a double shift with a tip jar that never gets full, and still stop to draw a whale on a stranger's napkin without being asked. That tells you everything about their character too. He walked back toward the waterfront, cap low, hands in his pockets. Somewhere behind him, Harbor Light Diner was still open. Amanda Cole was still working. And for the first time in a long time, what she earned would be waiting for her at the end of it. Some things don't require a dramatic confrontation to change. They require someone to pay attention, to actually look at what's happening in front of them, instead of deciding it isn't their concern. Dignity isn't complicated to protect. It just requires someone to decide it's worth the effort. The question isn't whether you have the power to help when you see something wrong. The question is whether you'll use it. If Amanda's story stayed with you, drop a comment and tell us about a moment someone showed up for you when you didn't expect it. We read every one of them. Share this if you know someone who needs to hear that the people watching out for us sometimes come from unexpected places. And subscribe, because these are the stories that remind us what we're actually capable of when we decide to care. 3 weeks later, Chris was back in Byron Bay when his phone buzzed with a message from Gerald Marsh. Thought you'd want to know. Investigation complete. Derek Sloan charged with wage theft under Georgia labor law. Restitution ordered, $4,847 to Amanda across documented incidents. Likely more when we finish reviewing the other location. Marcus Webb at the Tybee Island store is also under review. Chris read it twice, set his phone down, picked it up again. He typed, "How's Amanda?" Gerald's reply came in under 2 minutes. Promoted floor supervisor, effective last Monday. She asked if she could use part of the back payment to set up a staff emergency fund, a pool that any employee can draw from, no questions asked, for genuine emergencies. We matched it 2-to-1. It's already been used twice. Tommy Briggs gave a full statement to our legal team the same afternoon you left. Everything he'd seen over 8 months. He's now head cook with a $4.50 hourly raise and first right of refusal on the catering contracts we run through the Tybee Island location. He said to tell you he doesn't regret saying something. He regrets waiting so long to do it. Chris thought about that for a while. The particular architecture of a person who, the moment they get something back, immediately builds a system so the next person doesn't lose it in the first place. He typed, "She'll be running her own place in 3 years, Gerald." I told her that. She said she's thinking about it. Chris set his phone on the kitchen counter and went outside, where the Pacific was doing what the Pacific does. Enormous and indifferent and somehow still comforting. And stood there for a while thinking about nothing in particular. Or maybe thinking about everything. The way a single morning, a single decision to stay and pay attention instead of leaving could land somewhere in someone else's life months later. The way a 6-year-old named Iris with a stuffed rabbit named Captain would grow up, watching her mother become someone, not because the world suddenly became fair, but because her mother refused to believe that unfairness was the final word. He went back inside and started making breakfast. Eggs, toast, nothing fancy. The kind of breakfast his mother used to make after a long night when the work was hard and the money was short and the morning was still worth getting up for. What Gerald Marsh didn't tell Chris in that message, because he was still processing it himself, was what Amanda had said in her first official meeting as floor supervisor. It was a Tuesday morning. The full Harbor Light staff gathered at 6:45 before the doors opened. 12 people around pushed together tables in the dining room, coffee going, someone's phone playing low music from a speaker in the corner. Amanda stood at the front. She'd been there 3 times already that week to rearrange the room in her head, to find the right way to stand in it. She said, "I want to start by being honest with you about something." 12 sets of eyes on her, she said. "For 4 years, I thought the problem in this place was me, that if I was better, faster, smarter, nicer, I'd stop losing money I couldn't afford to lose and stop being afraid of someone who shouldn't have had power over me. I spent 4 years thinking the system was working the way it was supposed to, and I was the variable that was broken." She paused. I wasn't the variable. She looked around the room. At Tommy, who'd watched and felt powerless. At Maria, who'd kept her distance for self-preservation. At Ashley, who'd only been here 3 weeks and was still figuring out what kind of place this was. So here's what this floor is going to be now. If someone takes something from you, money, credit, dignity, anything, you bring it to me. First. Before you decide it's not worth fighting. Before you decide no one will believe you, you bring it to me and we figure it out together. She pulled a piece of paper from her apron pocket. A list. Written by hand, in the particular care of someone who'd rewritten it several times to make sure the words were exactly right. "These are the things that are never policy here," she said. And then she read them aloud. It took 4 minutes. When she finished, there was a silence of the kind that happens when something true has been said in a room and everyone in it knows it. Then Tommy started clapping. The way people clap not because they feel obligated, but because their hands just start moving. By the time the doors opened at 7, Harbor Light Diner on River Street had a new quality in the air. Not obvious, not theatrical, just lighter. The way a room feels when the thing that was pressing down on it has finally been removed and the space it left behind has started to fill with something better. Amanda Cole stood at the entrance and watched her first customers of the morning come through the door. She smiled. Not the smile of someone performing warmth for tips. The real one. The one she'd been saving. The investigation, when it concluded fully 6 weeks after that Thursday morning, turned out to be larger than Gerald Marsh had anticipated. Derek Sloan had been running variations of the same system across 2 Harbor Light locations simultaneously. At the Tybee Island store, a server named Donna Reeves, 53 years old, 12 years with the company, grandmother of 4, had been losing an average of $60 per week for the better part of a year. She'd mentioned it to her daughter, who'd told her to document everything. She'd started keeping a notebook. Dates, amounts, Derek's exact words. She'd been waiting for the right moment to hand it to someone who could do something with it. When Gerald's legal team called her, she drove to the River Street location and handed them 31 pages of handwritten documentation, each entry written in the careful block letters of someone who decided that precision was the only form of power available to her. Gerald photocopied it and kept the original. The total restitution figure when the court finalized it was just over $11,000 across 7 identified employees at 2 locations. Derek Sloan paid it. He had no choice. The recordings Chris had made, clear, time-stamped, with Derek's voice unambiguous in both content and tone, left no room for the kind of alternative narrative his attorney initially tried to construct. He also lost his manager's license under Georgia's Wage Theft Protection Act, which meant the restaurant industry he'd spent 2 decades in was no longer open to him in any supervisory capacity. His attorney issued a statement on his behalf. In it, Derek expressed regret for any misunderstanding regarding tip management procedures. Gerald read the statement and said nothing publicly. Privately, to his HR director, he said, "That's not an apology. That's a man who still doesn't understand what he did." He was right. But there was one moment, just one, that didn't make it into any statement or legal filing. 3 days after the ruling, Derek Sloan sat in his car in the parking lot of a Walgreens in Pooler, Georgia, holding the restitution order. $11,042. 7 names. The paper was folded and unfolded so many times the creases had gone soft. He'd been sitting there for 20 minutes. He wasn't calculating. He wasn't drafting a response in his head or thinking about his attorney's next move. He was just looking at the names. Amanda Cole, Donna Reeves, 5 others he'd barely registered as people, only as line items in a budget he'd decided he deserved to manage. Amanda Cole, 4 years, single mother. A 6-year-old named Iris, he'd known that. He'd known all of it. He'd used all of it, the child, the thin margin, the absence of options, the way a contractor uses a tool, efficiently, without sentiment. He sat in the parking lot for another 10 minutes, didn't cry, didn't call anyone, just sat. It wasn't enough. It wasn't close to enough, but it was the first time in his adult life that Derek Sloan stopped performing for an audience, even an internal one, and let the full weight of what he'd done sit in the car with him without flinching away from it. He folded the paper back along its worn creases and started the car. Understanding wasn't required for the outcome. The outcome was the outcome. The money went back. The man was gone. The notebook Donna Reeves had kept for 11 months sat in a legal file somewhere. Its 31 pages of careful documentation proof that the people who seem to have the least power are often the ones paying the most attention. Donna Reeves and Amanda Cole met for the first time at a Harbor Light staff event Gerald organized the following spring. A Saturday afternoon, closed to the public, tables pushed together in the center of the River Street location, food everyone had brought from home, laughter coming from every corner, someone's uncle playing guitar badly in the corner. They sat across from each other with paper plates of potato salad and found they had a great deal in common. Both mothers, both women who'd spent years in work that people undervalued and underpaid. Both women who'd learned the particular skill of making themselves small enough to survive a system that was designed to extract from them without acknowledgement. Both women who were, as of this spring afternoon, no longer small. Donna said, "I kept thinking I was wrong, even when I knew I wasn't." Amanda said, "Same, every single day. Maybe I miscounted, maybe I misunderstood, maybe it was actually policy and I just didn't know because I didn't know enough." Donna said, 11 months I wrote it down, because the only thing I had was the record. Amanda said, "Why didn't you report it before?" Donna was quiet for a moment, because I needed the job, and because I'd seen what happened to people who made noise. They got managed out, got their hours cut, got their reference calls not returned. She paused. You don't report things when the cost of reporting is higher than the cost of enduring. You just endure, and you write it down, and you wait. Amanda nodded. She understood completely. The thing that changed it, Donna said, wasn't that it got better. The thing that changed it was that someone from outside the system looked in, and then the cost calculation shifted. She looked across the table at Amanda. I heard her customer saw it happen and stayed. Amanda nodded. Donna said, "I'm glad he stayed." Amanda said, "Me too." They sat for a while in the comfortable silence of two people who have understood something difficult together. Outside the windows, the Savannah waterfront moved through its Saturday afternoon. Tourists with maps, a riverboat making its slow circuit, the particular quality of light on the water that had made people want to paint this city for 300 years. Inside Harbor Light Diner, two women who had endured a long and quiet and costly injustice sat across from each other and ate potato salad and listened to the room fill up around them. The guitar uncle hit a chord that was actually correct for once. Someone across the room laughed, the kind of laugh that starts genuine and spreads whether you want it to or not. It was not a dramatic moment. It was better than that. It was just a regular afternoon that they had both earned. This is a fictional, dramatized story created for educational and inspirational purposes. All supporting characters, businesses, and events are fictional. Any resemblance to real persons other than Chris Hemsworth is coincidental. Narration is AI assisted.